I've never had a better view into our criminal justice system than since I joined the Innocence Project Board, which I've talked about with you. And my God, our criminal justice system is broken in so many ways, and these are some of the ways that he was talking about that come from Baltimore specifically. Some of them policies of O'Malley, some of them just generic parts of what became the culture there of how the police behaved. But a lot of them, of course, driven by what's caused a lot of our problems overall, which is the war on drugs, which is just, we know in some ways what a catastrophe it is.
Yeah, I mean,
but we don't even know enough ways. I mean, it is it literally is one of the biggest catastrophes in the history of this country. I think it literally is.
The interesting thing about his take on the war on drugs, Simons, is that it's not necessarily that one-to-one relationship in terms of incarceration rates, but what it did is it really ruined police work and led to sort of the systemic harassment that we see. Because
that's right.
Because then it becomes sort of this like all-encompassing, like you're almost always illegal in terms of the relationship with the police to the citizens. The citizens are
and if you want to arrest somebody, there's almost any justification
right.
for it, because you can just claim, as he points out, that you saw somebody with a baggie. I mean, because and they know that they're in deep crap from that because of the kinds of charges we have because of our war on drugs and the priority placed on that. It takes away from any relationship the police have with the citizens, and it gives them outsized power. And there's many sayings, and the biggest one, probably most famous one, being about what absolute power does. The more power that you give these people over individuals' lives to destroy lives, and without transparency, this is inevitable. It's an inevitable product of this, and that's so. I mean, obviously, he pointed out what's and some of the stuff has now been changed in Baltimore, the way they are policing, which is good. And it's an improvement. I mean, but these are the kinds of reforms we need in police departments. We need among prosecutors. We need these reforms throughout the country. And for me to be seeing this, watching this as sort of a like anybody else as a spectator, what's going on in Baltimore versus what I've seen firsthand in some of the documents I've seen doing the Innocence Project stuff. Combining both of those, you can't help but say that, this is. I can't think of the author of the book, the third Jim Crow, which is about essentially that's what our prison system has become. And I mean, it is a negative feature in every way imaginable, from ruined lives to militarized police to proliferation of drugs to proliferation of weapons, spread of disease. And I mean, you can go on and on. The cost to our society economically, there's no positive from it. Nothing. At least with some bad issues, you can find a positive. I dare anyone to find any positive aspect of the war on drugs, how it's benefited our society at all.
Now, we should also, I mean, there's sort of two parts to this, right? Because it's one thing, and even in the context of when we were talking about Michael Brown and other, Michael Brown in particular, in Ferguson. But
yeah.
the on one hand, you have the way that the police relate to members of this community. And then sort of when you step back from that, you also have to sort of see, like, the police are really a manifestation of a broader problem in terms of the way that society is treating these communities. In other words, these people are living in squalor. There was some reports that it is likely, you had Freddie Gray and his sister who had lead poisoning. I saw some reports that when they were kids, there was surveys that showed about 13,000 kids had gotten lead poisoning, essentially in that part of Baltimore, in that area of Baltimore. But that if they used the type of screening that they use today, that number would have been closer to 30,000. So in other words, we have a segment of the population in Baltimore, and this plays out, I think, in many cities across the country, where we have basically housed them in a ghetto, slum, whatever you want to call it, and with no services or limited services, with no hope, with no jobs, with victims of redlining and victims of mortgage scams and just living in not just in poverty, but also a complete lack of hope and potential. And then basically what society says to the cops is, okay, and now it's your job to make sure they stay there. And
right.
and so there's addressing the failure of the cops to treat the way that they sort of criminalize this community, and then there's also sort of the broader addressing of the problems in Baltimore that I think, frankly, that exists obviously in other places as well, that is beyond the ability of a city government to deal with.
No, these are everything that, especially since the Reagan years, but really a legacy that is an easy sort of, it's easy to kind of go back and trace things from slavery to Jim Crow. I mean, obviously, in many of these African American communities, we have all sorts of different problems when it comes to certain among rural, poor white communities we've also ignored. But this, particularly when you're looking at some of these urban neighborhoods and how we've treated people, it almost becomes an inevitability. I mean, first of all, obviously, if you're impoverished, if you're hungry, if you have no hope and no options, and the people on the corner who are dealing drugs are people who have the money, those are bad enough motivations. But let's add in there now for a second that, when you're bringing up the whole thing about lead paint, well, we've talked about this. I'm pretty sure we've talked about this on this show. When all these criminologists have looked at why the crime rate has gotten so low, this is this is an amazingly interesting thing. And also tragic in that they think that that lead paint has led to violent behavior. So if you're these communities and you've got these sort of racists saying, oh, well, look, it's just black people, doing whatever. First of all, anybody who's desperate enough is going to behave in a certain way. I'm sorry. But let's add in that maybe we're talking about people that have been poisoned to the point where it's affecting their behavior.
People can go back and listen. I think we've done 2 or 3 shows actually on this phenomena, and it's actually tied in primarily the crime rates started to drop dramatically in this country and internationally, usually about 15 to 20 years after unleaded gasoline is outlawed. And presumably also as a function of unleaded paint being outlawed as well, and being abated. And this is just one more thing that if you are poor in this country, and particularly you're living in an urban area, this is something that hasn't been there's been no remediation of this stuff.
That's right. So it turns out that this is just another way, food, and when it comes to nutritional deprivation, and it comes to deprivation in terms of personal security and education and all these other things that we've just sort of thought, just ignore them as if it will just go away because that's smart to think that. But now we're adding in this factor on top of it. Which is maybe these are people that are suffering from certain types of, I don't know if it's mental illness, I'm not sure, elevated levels of certain toxins, but whatever it is, it's clearly something that many researchers believe affects people's behavior and makes them more violent. Well, what's the shock here then if we're talking about very specific communities where there's more lead, in the paint? And so, these are all the kinds of factors that have been ignored. And it seems we only pay attention when this kind of a thing happens. I'll put one thing out there also. I've talked to this show before about some of the stuff that I've done to try to fight to get President Obama to raise the overtime threshold. And I've done work with Nick Hanauer, who I think either, Sam, you've had him on the show. You've probably talked about him.
I think at the very least on
Ring of Fire.
Yes.
Who he was an original investor in Amazon, and obviously what comes with that is doing quite well financially, but he's incredibly progressive and has talked about the pitchforks coming for people like us and sort of said morally we should do something. But even if you don't want to look at the moral equation, if you're a 1%er and you think you look at this and think it just goes away, you have no understanding of history. And they're coming for us at some point. You should know. So he sent out a tweet that went pretty viral. A lot of people tweeted out. And I am, of course, trying to find it now So it's the kind of thing that one would want to have ready if they were going to give it that kind of an introduction. But this is me we're talking about.
Paraphrase.
So, I mean, essentially that, that this kind of inequality in history, it's only but ended one way. That you can't get to these levels of inequality and think, oh, it'll just solve itself, or oh, nothing will happen. That anyone with any cursory examination of history knows how this ends up. If you allow this kind of inequality to go on, you get many more Baltimores, and this is only a sign, it's a signal to us, something that should wake us up. And here's what it is. He said, you show me a highly unequal society, and I'll show you a police state or an uprising.
Right.
There are no counterexamples, none. And that's exactly it. Find me a counterexample where this kind of inequality has gone on and a society has thrived and there hasn't been an uprising or a revolution. I dare one to look in history and find it.